In Grandma's Attic by Arleta Richardson. Illustrated by Dora. Chapter 4. Grandpa's Apron. "Look here, Grandma," I said. "This square is awfully heavy. Where was it from?" Grandma and I were tying her big quilt, and many of the big squares had yielded a good story. Grandma looked, and then a twinkle came to her eye. "Well now," she said, "that was a pocket from your Grandpa's apron." "Grandpa's apron? Did Grandpa really have his own apron?" I giggled. "He certainly did," Grandma laughed. "And you aren't the first one who thought that was funny." "Tell me about it, Grandma," I said. So Grandma began. Grandpa came home from town one day with this big heavy piece of goods. He said he wanted an apron made for himself, a very special apron. That evening he drew a picture of it for me, and together we cut a pattern out of paper. It was a special apron, too. It had a pocket for everything Grandpa wanted with him. There was a pocket to hold scripture verses written on cards. These verses were pulled out and recited to Nellie and Bess while Grandpa milked in the morning and at night. There was a deeper pocket that held a small songbook. It was propped on the stall, and Grandpa sang all the verses of "How Firm a Foundation" or "Oh, This Uttermost Salvation" to the stock as he fed and watered them. Sermon notes were in another pocket. They came out as Grandpa followed behind the plow, and the horses were treated to next Sunday's sermon while they walked up and down the rows. One little pocket in a handy place held round, pink, wintergreen drops with small X's on them. Another had a selection of nails that often came in handy. There was room for a fresh cookie or a piece of homemade bread and butter. I'm not sure I ever knew what was in all those pockets, but Grandpa did. It was a funny-looking apron, to be sure, and Grandpa took a lot of good-natured teasing about it. My brother Reuben would say, "Here comes Len in his milkmaid's apron. Do you suppose the cows would give any milk if he forgot to wear it?" Or Roy would say, "Oh, Len, do you have an empty pocket in your apron to carry my tools to the back field?" Grandpa would laugh along with them, but he would say, "I hope you boys notice that I don't make a dozen trips to the house or barn while I'm working. I have everything right where I need it." And so Grandpa continued to replenish his pockets and wear this apron as he went about his chores. But a day was to come when no one laughed at Grandpa's apron. One afternoon in the fall, Grandpa was working in the hayloft, repairing the floor before the new hay came in. Somehow his foot slipped on a crossbeam and he started to fall. His apron flew out and caught on the hook that was used to lift the bales to the loft, and Grandpa hung suspended many feet over the concrete barn floor. He began to pray loudly for the Lord to send someone to the barn. The Lord heard him. So did Reuben and Roy, who ran to the barn door to find the reason for such loud prayers. Quickly, they pushed the hay wagon under Grandpa and began to lower the hay lift, with Grandpa still attached to it, onto the wagon bed. "You boys get me down from here," Grandpa shouted, "and maybe I can talk Mabel into making you an apron like this." As they loosened the hook from Grandpa's apron, Reuben exclaimed, "What in the world kept that hook from going clean to the bottom of this silly apron?" "Why, the Lord did, of course," Grandpa responded. "And now maybe you clowns will have a little more respect for this valuable piece of goods." He stalked to the house, leaving Reuben and Roy to contemplate the distance that he would have fallen to the barn floor had not the Lord, and his apron, held him securely. I mended the apron, and Grandpa continued to keep it stocked and in use. The boys didn't laugh again. They knew they had seen a miracle that day. Grandma laughed and patted the square on the quilt. "That sure was a strong piece of goods," she said, "and you wouldn't be here to listen to the story if your grandpa hadn't been wearing it that afternoon." End of chapter 4.